It's 5 o'clock. Let's start this meeting, May 3rd, Plymouth Village Water and Sewer District.
I make a motion we approve the meeting minutes as of April 5th.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Payroll and AP manifests.
Make a motion we accept the payroll and manifests as presented.
Second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. The big topic for the evening. Discussion of potential debt service impacts.
Okay.
In other words, we have a lot of money we really need to talk about, whether we should spend it or not.
A ton of it.
So,
I would, I want to cut right to the chase. $1.8 million added to the Holderness Well project.
That is ridiculous.
Why are we hearing about this at the 11th hour, and what does that say for any future project?
hold on a minute. We have visitors. We have
You have Mike, you have Rebecca.
yeah.
So I realize Dylan is not on this call.
He is. He just joined us. He just joined.
I guess I'll just chime in. The state regulations have changed since the initiation of this project, which have required additional treatment of manganese from the water. And I think that is driving quite a bit of this. Whereas the original project was just supposed to be a new set, or new wells on the Holderness side and a connection to the distribution system. Now there needs to be treatment of that water, which has required an additional crossing of the river. And that river crossing has some challenges to it. And that siting up, or I guess the preferred siting of it, DOT has somewhat rejected because it interferes with the highway corridor. So that I don't want to misspeak for Dylan, but that has been the biggest part of that change in the project. Is instead of just building a well pump house and an extension of the distribution system, now we have to kind of double up in the lines and then we have to treat it. We have to remove that manganese and
Dylan is on board here, so he can step in. But before we do that, commissioners, Elizabeth Willing is online. Elizabeth is with Representative Custer's office.
Yes.
Okay.
And I invited them to observe, to understand what's going on with why we need more money from Washington.
Help.
Yes.
Mike, maybe I'm really stupid, but why can't we treat the water up at the pump station?
Right.
Up at the storage tanks. I mean, why do we have to go crazy adding another line? We're bringing the water up there anyway to mix with what's in the tank, right?
It's a little more complicated, but Dylan could probably explain.
I can step in if you want.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So yeah, as far as the iron and manganese, when we say treatment, there's a couple of different ways to treat for iron and manganese. One is, removal of iron and manganese. The other one is sequestering, which with the new iron and manganese limits, that's no longer really allowed. What that does is it essentially just turns your iron and manganese into something that doesn't come out aesthetically in the water. So with the new wells coming online, the treatment method that's accepted by DES for this is actually blending the new water source with the existing water sources to drop that overall iron and manganese. And the reason we can't really do that in the tanks is because the treatment needs to be done before it reaches the first customer. So what you have is households on the way to the tank, essentially that are going to be receiving that water, and you can't have that iron and manganese concentration above the MCL.
Okay.
How much of an assurance do we have that the manganese level is consistent over time as we continue to draw on that?
None.
So, and part two of that is, if it changes, then does the mixing method no longer hold up as a treatment method?
So essentially, as Don said, there's no guarantee that your manganese levels will not go up. And to be honest, over time, manganese levels do typically tend to increase. As you've seen probably in these wells over a matter of, many years, the iron manganese levels have continued to tick up to the point where now, even with the further regulations, you're probably going to see an increase continue to go up and up. But with the blending, this is a cheaper alternative than putting in a full iron manganese treatment facility, which would consist of pressurized filters, additional chemical treatment, things like that. So the project here, essentially, the treatment that's happening here for iron manganese is blending. But the real treatment that would need to happen if we, decided to put this, not necessarily take this through Foster Street, you would still need to do chlorination, pH. So, regardless of blending the iron and manganese out, to treat this water to what it would need to be to go into distribution, let's say, from Holderness, which, has relatively low or no iron and manganese, I'd have to look back at the results, you still need to do a chemical treatment facility. So the overall, with this project, utilizing the Foster Street chemical treatment allows you to blend the water, reduce your iron and manganese, and provide the pH and chlorination treatment you need for the new well sources.
Okay, so-
but we've always had to do the pH and chlorination. That's
Right,
not
that's
a
not
new.
anything
That's not
new.
new. So
Right.
why wouldn't that have required an initial? Why wouldn't that have been an initial design to come over to this side of the river?
It is in the initial design. So the initial design was actually to build a new. I'm sorry, I missed the first part about what Mike talked about, but the alternative here that was originally proposed was essentially building a new treatment station near the Holderness School property.
Right.
And that station would have consisted of chemical treatment, like I just said, for pH chlorination. The benefit here, and remember, when this project came about, from my understanding, the iron and manganese MCL had been put in place,
Right.
which didn't, trigger your treatment. So now that you do have a requirement for iron and manganese treatment coming along for the Foster Street wells, the benefit of the Holderness project pumping across the river and then utilizing the existing Foster Street, treatment chemical station is that you're able to not build a new facility, really. You're able to blend that water, utilize the existing facility.
Right.
Going back across the river would join you back into the Holderness side of the distribution system, which essentially gives you a more resilient distribution system. So there are, as we talk about costs and things, there are some alternatives here.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear.
Right, it would be to join the distribution system at Foster Street only. Right now, the whole project consists of going across the river, joining at Foster Street, and coming back across the river and joining at Holderness. And that basically loops your distribution system, gives you a more resilient system.
Yeah, so.
And it also gets the high quality water back to the Holderness School, which was part of the original negotiation.
Right, no, I get that.
We had the
but-
5 options a couple, probably close to 6 months ago at this point for that project, all the way up from treating over on the Holderness side to the lowest option was just bringing it across the river.
Yeah, but now that we've got this, I'm trying to figure out where all the extra $1.8 million is coming from. And is that coming from DOT's cost for the other line coming under the, and if it is, what is our alternative that we don't have to eat that 1.8 million?
So there's a couple of different places where costs increase in general. So the chemical treatment that's currently practiced at Foster Street is a very basic system. It essentially, an operator sets the pace for the chemical pumps. When the wells turn on, the chemical pumps turn on at a certain pace. One of the modifications that needs to be made in order for this system to work now and in the future, and this is taking into account that someday you may have to go to a pressure-driven system for chemical dosing if you have to do maintenance to the storage tanks. So this is kind of a future factor in here. We need to pace the chemical that goes into the system based on flow rate, which is chemical flow pacing. So that was something that was added essentially, or will need to be added, that wasn't originally included in the scope of work up front with the alternative here.
Rough number, Dylan?
The rough number for that, for the chemical treatment, it depends on exactly what we want to do. There's a little bit of value engineering, but roughly I think it's probably 50 to 100, somewhere in there, if I remember right. But it consists of some new chemical pumps to correct some existing issues. We did work with DES to eliminate the need to add day tanks. Currently, without day tanks, you're not in compliance with 10 state standards, but you can get an exemption essentially by working with the state. We did get that exemption, but they are going to require us to do some level monitoring, put some instrumentation in there for the bulk tanks. So overall, it's a necessary to make this system work now and in the future.
So call it 100 grand?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can call it that.
All right, so that's 100K out of the 1.8 million. To me, that's chump change. Where's the big bucks going?
So when we started working through this, we started discussions with DOT on that path. So the path with DOT was to come through at an angle underneath the I-93 overpass over the river, and then essentially we would come at an angle under there. And DOT, initial discussions with DOT, we said, this is what we're going to think about doing. And nobody piped up and said, well, we aren't going to allow that at all. They said, okay, propose what your plan is, and we'll go through that. So we proposed our plan, put the alignment together, and DOT came back. And as everybody might be familiar, there's a couple of different bureaus in DOT, and it's kind of a step-by-step process. You get through one, you go to the next one. They came back and said that the alternative wasn't going to work for them. They had concerns about that alternative, the route that was taken, was going to pose some concerns with modifications to the bridge in the future, any kind of future work there. So they told us that they would prefer it if we went a different route. So the different route has been proposed, and that essentially crosses the river straight across. And right now, we're proposing to do open trench underneath the bridge on an existing roadway. So that, essentially the rework there is an additional cost. And then overall,
Spitball that cost.
Can you say that again?
So yeah,
Rough estimate on
spitball,
that.
cost estimate.
I'd probably be taking a guess at the rough estimate right now. When we put together an estimate for the directional drilling, we literally go to a directional drill contractor and put together that cost. So I think the last time we went to a directional drill for the original directional drill estimate, they came back at something around probably $200 to $300 a foot. And I think we're talking somewhere around, I think, 1,000 feet, somewhere in there, I think. I mean, it's a sizable cost to do directional drill.
300,000. I'm still not adding up to 1.8 million.
Right. The other thing that comes into play here is the market in general. So the market in general right now, if you ordered ductile iron pipe today, it won't show up for 26 weeks. If you ordered HDPE pipe, it won't show up for 20 weeks. The cost of everything has gone up significantly, and it's across the board. It's not particularly this project or anything like that, but that is another factor that comes into play with the increases in cost here. So I mean, we're trying to be proactive. When we do our estimates, we try to project out to the midpoint of what construction would be, because that's realistic for what you'd see from a bidder, and that's another one of the factors that plays in here. Unfortunately, it's not as straightforward for where that 1.8 comes from between preliminary design and now, but I can tell you that other projects we're having, even our larger treatment plant projects that go out with professional estimators that are independent to us, are coming in 25+% over cost. It's wild right now. We can't really explain that. So we're trying to factor that cost in here so that you don't get blindsided when we actually go to bidding.
So if we go to bid with this extra 1.8 million, what's the guarantee that it's not gonna be higher than that after we go to bid? And we're gonna have change orders that are gonna cost us a fortune like we've had in the past.
Unfortunately, I have no guarantee that, when we go to bid, that the prices will come in exactly what has been put together. This is our best estimate. There is a contingency factor that's put in there. And, the
On top
design,
of the 25%.
we essentially designed so that change orders don't come into play. If there's a change order we have to account on, then, I would factor that cost into there.
Is the contingency on top of the 25%? Or is that part of the 25%?
Of the market increase?
Yeah.
No. Contingency right now, I think we're carrying a 15% contingency.
Okay.
So essentially what we're talking about, a project that was initially projected at 3.3 million is now about 5.
Correct.
Okay. And in that $5 million, is it 15% contingency? Or do we need to factor
This project started before.
more into that?
Let me see. Okay, right now, I brought it up. So the estimate that's put out with the 1.8 shortfall has a 20% contingency included in that,
Okay.
which is about $640,000.
All right, so run a quick total off the top of my head. 330 and 1.8 is 5.1, 5.2.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, since we're talking about. Okay.
Can I ask a really dumb question?
There are no doubt.
Oh, this is a dumb question. Since this project and everything that was designed about this project happened before the changeover to the state testing, is there no grandfathering in somewhere along the lines, or we just gotta keep dealing with all the changes?
Health-based standards, so as soon
Okay.
as they come out with
All
a
right, if
health-based
it's health,
standard.
yeah, if it's health-based, then,
Right.
okay, that answers that
Hold on to
dumb
your chair,
question.
because next is PFAS.
Right.
Yeah, I don't even wanna think about that one.
Our friends in Maine just outlawed land application of sludge, so
Yeah.
that's,
I heard that.
we're gonna take that one on the chin sooner than later. So thanks, Dylan. We're changing your name to the Grim Reaper.
Talk about a sober,
Yeah,
The
yikes.
truth.
So we have
So where can
others
we cut costs?
from Wright Pierce, but what I'd like to do is kind of, not looking for an answer today, but looking to try and characterize the challenge that we face. And so if you kind of we'll do a walkthrough of this printout that we've given you, but I mean, essentially,
But is this,
this includes 1.8.
it does include the
Yeah.
1.8, okay. Yay!
Oh, well, it depends upon your point of view. Yeah.
There was a little sarcasm in that, yay.
Yeah, okay. So, our overall funding picture at the moment is such that we're looking at essentially having to borrow for water. This is starting with water. We can do the overall, whichever. But in water, we're looking at having to borrow 9.7 million in order to secure 5.5 million in grants. So we'll be able to complete 15.275 million in construction projects if we borrow 9.7 million.
And that's guaranteed.
There are no guarantees. The money's guaranteed.
That's what I mean.
That
The
doesn't mean
money's
we can
guaranteed.
Yeah,
Right.
doesn't mean we complete the projects for that.
but that assumes that financing at 3% and that assumes no cost.
25 overruns.
Right,
In
but we had-
25 years
Right.
financing. And again, those numbers are rough. But, so, and then for
You gotta
sewer,
get Bob scrambling for good interest rates.
we're talking about having to borrow 7.6 million in order to secure 4.3 million for a total of 12 million in projects. So overall, as far as the impacts are concerned, we're looking at total borrowing of 17.4 million in order to secure almost 10 million in
Yeah, so the
Federal
grants are funding about a third
Yeah.
of the cost of the
Yeah.
project,
and so
if nothing.
and then we look at the
Detrimental
kind of the
happens.
second page gives you the impacts. So currently, our current debt service package for water, we're currently paying this year $204,000 in principal and interest. If we borrow all that needs to be borrowed, and it won't all hit the books, but I'm projecting 2026, it may be a year later, I can't believe it'll be a year sooner. So, but before 2030, that amount will jump from 204,000 to 634,000. And if we, and that's just for rural development. If we add the ARPA offerings that we've gotten from DES, that'll add another 127,000. So if we go with the full package, our interest payments, principal and interest, will jump from 204 to 761.
That's just on the water side.
That's just on water. And sewer, we're currently paying this year 307,000 principal and interest, debt service. The RDA package will add another 300,000. And the ARPA package will add another 142,000. So we'll wind up paying total principal and interest for sewer of 749. So essentially, in summary, our current annual debt service payment combined is 512. It will go up 3 times to 1.5 million.
Yikes.
And so the question, we don't have to answer it today, but we are already committed, because you've accepted the RDA package and we're under construction. So you're already committed for water to go to 634 and for sewer
To go to
to go to 607. So we're already committed for.
So we're adding $260,000
In round numbers.
in round numbers,
Yeah.
you know, right? I mean, when you think about it that way, we've already committed to the bulk of this money, and 260 added onto that is not that much, but we've got to figure out what that's doing to the rate.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, well, I'm just comparing
Yeah.
that against net revenue. I mean,
right, exactly.
Yeah, it's essentially, right now, we're operating at about 900,000, which is available for undesignated reserves,
Yeah.
and that will be totally gone. So, essentially, we'll be at bare knuckles, break even, and if there's one hiccup, we're in trouble. And to add to that, rural development is going to require us to have reserves against the improvements that are being made. So we've got to run a fair number of calculations. There's hope. I don't know that it's enough to make people excited, but the governor signed into law. You can explain it, but the governor signed into law last week legislation, the state
State aid grant.
state aid grant funding, which will potentially reduce this.
The sewer portion of the principal and interest by 20 to 30%.
Oh, that's sweet.
If
So that-
Potential.
if the legislature funds it,
I heard
Yeah.
that.
which is always kind of the fun game, is, so there's not a lot of certainty. So the thing we're gonna have to struggle with out of the next 4 or 5 months is how do we implement this? How do we integrate this?
Well, when do we have to make these decisions? That's,
Well, we won't have to make any hard decisions until, hopefully, after we see the results of the bids that are going out.
for the well project.
No,
So,
well project.
one caveat to that is that the funding packages for the ARPA projects, Highland Street, etc., those need to be submitted
By
in
30.
June.
By June 30.
So we're gonna be working right up against the bid opening for Main Street and the due date for when those ARPA grant applications, the full funding package is due. So just want everyone to be aware that those are gonna be really tight together. The ARPA funding applications are due by the end of June. And, obviously, we're gonna have the bid package for Main Street out shortly, but, the bid opening will be in June effectively. So there might be a lot of decisions made in a short amount of time.
Yeah, we're still, I mean, one of the.
June's not far away.
We've got a meeting tomorrow, but one of the things that, and we talked about this last week, Mike, is the extent to which, once we apply for those ARPA monies, are we on the hook regardless of the ultimate bid that comes in? Our warrant articles were crafted such that our borrowing capacity is the ceiling. So if those bids come in, on any of those ARPA projects, if those bids come in higher, and listening to what Dylan has to say, I mean, I don't know how much flex room we have in there, but one of the things that I'm anxious to hear from DES is what happens at the end of the day. We for instance, with sewer, we borrow 1.4 million for sewer on Highland Street. And if that's 20% low, then what? Are we obligated to continue and borrow the difference? In which case, we're in trouble because we can't, we've essentially set
Right.
our borrowing capacity in those warrant articles.
Yeah, the borrowing capacity is defined by the warrant articles.
Right, we
So,
know that. The problem is, what do we do if everything comes in high? And are we on the hook if we borrow the ARPA money? Can we just give the ARPA money back?
Oh, we won't get it.
So
Yeah,
you're
we
not
don't get it.
you're not on the hook with the ARPA money until a grant agreement is signed. The other part of that is the non-grant part of that project funding, which I believe the district's direction appears to be using SRF monies. So an SRF application, would go in, and there's a loan agreement that's associated with that. So the district's not officially obligated until either that grant agreement or that loan agreement are signed.
Okay.
So it can be done concurrently to get the paperwork ready to head in a direction. And I suppose if bids are out of control, we can revisit this discussion.
Well, one of the things we'll need to know before we get to a firm commitment to proceed with the ARPA stuff is what does the cost, what's the front end cost of applying? One of the concerns that I have at the moment with any of these is that we're on the hook. We're already invested in the engineering for all of the rural development stuff. And when we haven't even had a conversation about what happens. We're committed to borrowing, pick a number. It's about 15 million for the rural development project. If those bids come in, I mean, we already have part of that's gone over by 20% arguably, the first phase. What happens? You know, I mean, does rural development expect, you know, let's suppose that the 15 million is inadequate by 2 million. Does rural development expect that we're gonna borrow an additional 2 million from them or from some other source? And if we decide to cut out projects, are we on the hook to pay for that, for the engineering that's already been paid for and presumably was going to be funded through the grant loan package?
That's a great
I
question.
mean, we've got to sort out our downside. I mean,
Right.
Everybody's anxious to talk about the upside and all of the funds that are in the pipeline, and there's more rebuild better money that's coming out next year. And, you know, I mean, I get it, and it's all exciting stuff.
We need to test the parachutes.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, you know, I mean, we quickly need an understanding of that information, especially given the likelihood that, you know, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, Dylan's observation, I mean, if we're 30 to 40 weeks out on water pipe, what does that mean for the bid that we're gonna go out in a month and a half, or a month and a half, a month? What's that mean for Main Street?
We won't start until next year.
Well, other than it won't start for next year, is anybody even gonna bother bidding?
Will you be able to get the project done in the time frame?
Right.
No.
No.
Cost per ratepayer if we do this.
I'm a lot less worried about that. I mean, with either rural development or EDA with the
That's per
town,
year.
it's not, I mean, we're not causing the problem.
Right.
So, in general, because you have a finite
So obviously-
budget,
The residential
Sorry.
ratepayers
Go
have to
ahead.
pay that.
because you have a finite budget with rural development's not gonna increase their package. So if bids come in high, you're gonna have one of two options. Either initiate the award of the contract with a reduction change order, or if it's not too much higher, fund it locally, but that's gonna exceed your warrant article value, so
We
maybe.
can't.
You'd have to have a special meeting.
We'd have to have a special meeting to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, in times like this, maybe a portion of the project doesn't get awarded until a later date, in which the borrowing capacity can be increased. So again, normally, you know, we would see a project being awarded with a deductive change order to reduce the scope of work to fit within the project budget. And this is why we do a lot of additive alternates. I know on Main Street, we have some additive alternates, specifically to account for decisions that might need to be made like this after bid opening.
My big concern with doing something like that is we're not guaranteed that we'll go to annual meeting and the ratepayers will vote to say yes to that stuff that we
Correct.
put on the back burner.
Correct, and that's why it's not, you know, not awarding it at that time is normally the way that most municipalities handle a situation like that.
Well,
You know, we're just
it-
getting squeezed every which way we turn, and
It doesn't
there
seem,
just isn't any money out there. You know, we can't squeeze the ratepayers to the point where they have to choose between, you know, turning their water off and going to eat. You know, that just isn't gonna happen. So we've got to figure out another way around this, and, you know, I know we're not the only district that's having this issue, but, you know, Plymouth isn't rolling in bucks.
I can totally appreciate that this is not unique to Plymouth. This is happening all over the state, unfortunately, where after bids are open, that, you know, sometimes portions of a project need to get put on hold. We've
Like we did with
I would say a good chunk of municipalities have had to deal with this since the COVID and material
Right.
supply
I
issues.
Right.
don't need to hear the excuse.
So-
You're not alone.
So,
It doesn't make it any happier.
Well,
No,
it doesn't make,
it any
it doesn't
happier.
give a comfort level about, I mean, it just leaves too
Anything.
many places for
Yeah.
costs to run away.
Yep.
Both in the higher than normal bids that come back, the potential change orders that come along.
right?
And those could be related to materials, labor, you know, you name it.
And
just
interest
things that-
rates are going up. So,
Right,
you
yeah.
know, what's the guarantee that we're even gonna get something as low as 3%? And, you know, I think we need to tell Bob, go start asking and find out what interest rates are gonna be, because we can't,
But,
that's just another piece of this financial puzzle, is to find out what the
You're not gonna
interest
lock
rates
in an
are.
interest rate now.
No, I know we aren't,
So-
but,
well, some of the loan offers that we have from the state revolving loan fund or from rural development arguably have close to a cap. But I mean, at this point, the bigger issues, you know, and frankly, I mean, some of them are going to be what happens in November with the election. You know, what you know, we've got
boy,
Representative Custer's office is on the line. I mean, one of the big concerns that we're struggling with
help!
is the way some of the federal dollars are filtering through the state. Everything's coming through with a borrowing requirement.
Right,
And so-
nothing's just a grant.
You know, pre-pandemic, we were behaving very responsibly. We were pursuing rural development dollars. We were being very aggressive about it, and you know, now we find ourselves in a situation where additional funding in the pipeline is going to be approached similarly in terms of you've got to borrow in order to get the dollars, and we're going to rapidly reach our borrowing sweet spot, or perhaps exceed it. And you know, one of the challenges is the nature of the community. I mean, Plymouth has the ninth highest property tax rate in the state, which impacts all of our customers. And we have the 200, we're
probably gonna go up.
229 median household income
15
is
years of
229 from the bottom. So,
need.
you know, we've got a unique situation, you know, driven to some extent by the amount of untaxable property in town, the university being the largest. So a lot of issues in play that you all are going to have to decide collectively. And, you know, I mean, one of the questions is how do we, or do we even sample our customer base? At some point, you know, we're talking about a pretty substantial increase. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got a $3 million operating budget, and we're talking about increasing that by $1 million a year. That's a 25% increase in our cost to carry.
Right, well, what concerns me is, you know, this is as much as effort as we have spent on long-term planning in the past 5 years here.
Right.
We are,
We're just
it's
getting-
relatively short-term compared to what our true long-term need is. There's a whole nother level of
Another
need.
25 years. I think.
Right behind
you're right.
this, a whole nother wave of need as far as
Yeah, because-
infrastructure
Plus
improvement.
regulatory changes,
Yeah.
environment changes that we don't know yet
Right,
will be coming up and will require additional costs as well.
You know,
And
Just
there-
like the
there's-
magnesium.
and there's no, money out there right now for PFAS. Because we know that one's coming, but,
And we don't know how that's going to be handled. I mean, what we know is that, at least my interpretation of what I've read, is that Congress has just directed EPA to develop
right, yeah.
the standard.
Right, yeah,
And so they don't know what the standard's going to be at this point, but
Right.
we're getting all kinds of reaction. I've shared with you, I think, that Maine, this past week, essentially has
Yep.
eliminated the ability to dispose of wastewater sludge on the land application for the whole
Well,
state.
it's pretty easy for us to understand what that cost impact would be.
Profound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a recent legislation in New Hampshire that was proposed to set a PFAS soil standard by 2023.
Right.
No.
So, you know, we
That's
know
not
all of
too long
that's
from now.
in the pipeline. And, you know, the problem is the scales are kind of dramatically out of balance at the moment. Is that, you know, I mean, the pandemic was, you know, it introduced the notion that we need to do something quick about dealing with the economic issues. But you know, I think to a large extent, we have the unanticipated consequence of the supply chain. I mean, 30 to 40 weeks for water pipe
That's crazy.
is, you know, it's going to delay everything, and then the
Now,
construction
does-
industry is, you know, in a tailspin.
Does RDA understand that if we can't get parts and stuff, that the grant money will carry forward longer because the supply chain just isn't there?
I'm relying on that. I mean, all of my conversations with Eric have been kind of in the context of, we're already beyond
Right,
the-
yeah, if we don't
the
start,
initial,
Right.
you know, but he
breaking
understood,
ground, we're in trouble.
they understand why. I mean, that's the least of my worries, frankly, is that one of the two agencies is going to decide to claw back the money. The bigger concern is, will 27 million be enough to do what we're representing has to be done
Yeah.
with the borrowing and the
Yeah,
grant
just-
package?
Well-
just-
And if it isn't, where do we get the additional dollars?
Well, we're into 40 minutes of the meeting now, and we have a number of people on the line. I'm wondering, I mean, if we have any more specific questions for them, well, I think we should ask them and
What's-
move on, because we have a number of other items on our agenda.
Yeah.
What's the, what was our borrowing limit? Like, what did we say for the amount of money we were gonna borrow for our warrant articles?
Why don't you ask me an easy question?
Well,
It's here, I can tell you.
It
Let's
is?
say it's 100, let's see, it's a total,
It's 2.24 million for ARPA water
okay.
and 2.47 million for ARPA sewer.
so what's our deficit?
That's, well, the total, it's here. So the total ARPA dollars are 2.47.
This is what we voted on.
Yes.
Okay.
This represents the warrant articles,
But,
the 4 warrant articles.
okay, so, but we have this 1.8 million over, so I'm trying to figure out where, are we behind the 8 ball, or are we still, the 8 ball's still slightly behind us?
The well field is separate. This well field is funded by a trust, water trust loan.
Okay.
3.3, 1.6, and 1.6.
Okay.
That's the debt service is reflected here, but that has nothing to do with
With the borrowing.
the
Oh, okay.
ARPA borrowing.
All right,
Right.
got it. Thank you.
However, the 1.8 is added to the
Yeah, I got
1.3.
Yeah. May I just say, yuck.
Yes.
Okay, so noted.
Well, do we have any further questions for
Well,
I mean,
Bryce Pierce?
I mean, I think one of the big questions, Mike, that we're gonna need a quick answer to is, what are we looking at in terms of cost to respond to the deadline, the ARPA deadline, June 30?
Normally, we can do an SRF application and an ARPA application for about $5,000 or $6,000.
Free.
We just
Thank you.
let's get working on that, and we'll figure out just the details, how we pay for that after. You know, let's just work as a team and at least get the paperwork prepared, so that we're ready to submit it within the next month.
That's, okay, as
Yeah.
long as we're talking about it being a team and not getting to the goal line and finding out that, you know, I mean, if these bids come in at the end of
Insanity.
June or whenever we get them on the RDA project, I mean, if they come in 30% high, we're all gonna be sitting around scratching our heads trying to figure out, okay, what do we do, coach? And I'm not sure then what we do about the ARPA package. So I just want to be sure, I mean, if we're talking about 4 submissions, if it's 5,000 apiece, that's $5,000, or that's $20,000. So,
I think we could do all of it for $5,000 or $6,000, so
okay,
we'll get working on the paperwork, and then we can have that hard decision in June if we need to.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yes, thank you, Dylan.
Thank you,
In spite of what you told us.
You're welcome.
Well, if I may, just like in closing, just suggest, I mean, perhaps the hard part here is deciding if we were to go the route of choosing a subset of these projects,
Right.
how do we
decide?
and something just for thinking here in the coming weeks, how do we make a decision as to what we might do and what we might not do? I mean,
Right.
maybe it depends on the bid. Some come in a little more favorable than others. We don't know.
Right.
Oh, you're right.
Well,
Or do we go back and pick and choose, piecemeal?
the challenge is, I've struggled with it. The rural development package, which is a larger package, is, Jason has kind of educated me to the point of understanding that that's kind of the heart of the system. And so, we've got to do the Main Street. We've got to bring the transmission line across here, and we've got to fix the system, because the entire system is dependent upon this downtown core.
Right, and well, that's where we've had so many difficulties.
Get all the breaks.
Yeah, I mean, it's just...
So to me, the real challenge is in the ARPA funding, is, the Highland Street. I mean, it's just, and what we talked about last time and you guys approved, I've kind of dragged my feet a little bit on Russell Street. I mean, a lot of good management says we should replace the water and fix the sewer line in Russell Street before the town reconstructs it.
Of course, yeah.
Because that's a 25 to 35 year fix.
Right.
So, and then we go to Highland Street, and logic says, and good management says, we replace the water and sewer in Highland before the DOT rebuilds Highland Street. And so there aren't good answers.
Do we have any inkling from?
We're pushing rural development. I mean, we're as of today, I got notice from rural development that they hope to have the preliminary planning grant for Highland and Russell approved. They were hoping I would be able to sign it today, but they're now hoping by a week from today.
Yeah, no. I'm the dates for DOT doing Highland and town doing Russell.
The conversation is around 22, 23, 24, but that's all gonna all that's gonna get knocked in the hat.
Right, because we have nothing.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm guessing that we're gonna be sitting here in June and July after the bids come in, trying to figure out what's next. And the concern is that this is all going to be iterative, that there's more federal money in the pipeline that hasn't yet been
dropped,
finalized, that DES has not yet, and DOT have not yet defined in entirely how is it going to work and how do we get in line for it. So, and it's going to keep flowing. I can't recall what's the federal funding flow is 5 or 7 years. You remember? It was there's just a lot of moving parts, and the challenge becomes not wanting to miss the opportunity to do this. We keep calling it necessary and inevitable work, which is true. I mean, it's going to have to be done.
We can't kill ourselves either.
Right.
So there's that balance.
And how do we gauge it? How do we sequence it? The bad news is we're facing this dilemma. The good news is it's going to slow things down. So it's, when you stop and think that, we've been dealing with this ARPA money only since December.
Right.
And they said, hurry up and make a series of decisions and do this and submit applications. And so we jumped through all those hoops and we've got these commitments. And, you know, making a firm decision by the end of June is a big gulp.
Yes.
And so we've got a call tomorrow with DES to have kind of a conversation around that is, you know, what are you all gonna do?
Right.
And, you know, what's your thinking and how,
Yeah.
one of the big challenges is there's no coordination. I mean, ain't nobody working, you know, rural development, or EDA won't talk to rural development. They won't have a joint meeting with us. And, you know, DES is not talking to DOT. And so the bureaucracies are doing what the bureaucracies do well, which is kind of march in place to their own tune, and we're out here trying to figure out, to some extent, who's on first.
Well, is there anything that Annie Custer can do to help? I mean, Elizabeth
Pray
is
with the
on the
rest of us.
line, and, you know, is there anything that, you know, we have other people that can, you know, get in our corner and help? You know, I don't know.
Well,
It's a question.
I was that I invited them, but they reached out to me on Monday, or on Friday, indicating that they were interested in learning more about where we are. So I'm hopeful that
Take lots of notes,
that
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth's presence is meaningful, and that we'll have follow-up conversations.
Yep. Well, we do have a number of other items here,
Yep.
so let's move on, please. Next up on the list, lead lines, discussion of customer loan funding for water and sewer connection replacement. Of course, well, this
Is it gonna-
largely contingent upon
Contingent on
work
what we just
that,
discussed?
that we'll get, that
So
we
this-
may or may not do, but obviously we want to talk about how we can
Well, we
help
have-
the customer side of the meter to the house.
Yeah, and we, by and large, there's a couple of things in play. One is that we have this new requirement. I'm not sure, I haven't quite figured out where it is in the funding stream. But there is a lead removal process being implemented.
This is a
So-
this is coming from federal or state?
Federal.
Federal, okay.
But funding is coming through DES.
Right.
And so we know that, which is separate but related to this request, because we're about to start construction and replace water mains on Main Street. To some extent, we may discover some lead service, which is gonna have to be dealt with.
We
But-
know that it's there, right?
Well, I don't know that we
Yeah,
know.
one of the initial comments on DES's review of our Main Street plans was the complete replacement of any service line that has a lead component. So it doesn't even have to be the entire line. It could have one small component at the main, and we're gonna be required to replace the entire service from the main to the house. So that's the revised lead and copper rule, which is coming into effect later this year through 2024.
Oh my
And
gosh.
DES is actually holding us to those standards at this point in time under this project, which is new news to us as well.
So, let me understand, is this for, like, open trench whenever we're doing construction? Now, that could be even if we're doing a repair, or is it for just a general project?
Yes, it's anytime you notice it and document it, that you have to replace it.
Okay,
So if we have a break,
right.
and we discover in the process of repairing the break that there is lead associated with the service line, we're obligated to replace the service line.
So have a plan to replace it. Yeah.
So where does that, since we're only technically responsible to property line,
To the meter, right?
is
No,
it to,
to
no,
the
it's
curb
to
stop.
the
To the
curb
curb stop,
stop.
is the delineation, yeah.
Okay,
So basically property line, you know, depending on where the curb stop is, but generally it's right at the property
oh,
line.
the shut-off valve, right.
But, you know, so
So that's one of the
what
conversations
the, yeah,
we're
we've
gonna
got,
have with DES.
how are we gonna, is that passing along that
That's
cost
what,
to the,
that's what this is intended to suggest. That we're not responsible for that.
So
But-
we will be reimbursed then?
Well, we're essentially, this came from, before DES laid this on us, we had a number of folks come to us and say, when you're working on Main Street, what's gonna happen if you find out, or we find out that our water line is inadequate, or our sewer line is inadequate? Is that part of your project? And our response is no, it is not
Right,
part of
it's
our
not.
project. Well, what are we gonna do? And I'm anticipating that some of those folks may say, look, coming on the heels of a pandemic, I can't afford to borrow, to go to a
Right.
bank and borrow $5,000 or $10,000 to fix this. So as an
Right, so we
alternative to
previously discussed,
stalemate,
right,
we
right.
had essentially said, well,
We'll set up a payment, some
and
kind of
I've
payment.
checked it with our attorney, and it's essentially legal. We would enter into essentially what amounts to notes with these individuals that, would be a lien on the real estate, and so it would be secured by real estate, and it would be paid out over a period of 5 years or 10 years. We'd have to pick it,
Right.
a period of time. But in any event, that's different than what DES is telling us at this point. I'm kind of going down the road assuming that if DES is going to tell us we have to replace it, my response to DES is going to be fine, send us a check.
Right.
Because, pennies, we're already struggling.
Right.
And so if they come along and say, those are,
You have to
their
do this now.
estimate today is $5,000 to $10,000 depending upon the service.
You have 25 of them on Main Street, you're in trouble.
Yeah,
Right.
right, exactly.
Well, the
Right,
way
that's
things are
just
going,
one
we get
road,
one
right.
of them on Main Street.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
at this point,
Right,
with all the,
and knowing the age of some of the lines,
So-
we know that
Yeah,
there
so
could be
there's
quite a...
history there in Main Street just based on the age of the main.
Right.
And we have identified lead components through there. We haven't violated any lead regulations because our treatment is adequate to prevent the leaching of lead from the pipes. But yes, to say that
but going
there's,
forward, that there can't be any lead,
present.
so
right,
it's gotta go.
yep.
Okay,
So that's one of several streets that we have documented lead on.
And so we had, you and Gary sent me numbers today,
Yep.
which I can get them, but you
Yeah,
have
so
at your fingertips?
We have about 68 services total, water services, on our entire project length from Warren Street to Main Street onto Old North Main Street. And we have about 45 sewer services along that same stretch.
and roughly what percentage of them will have lead in them?
That's unknown.
Unknown until
Yeah.
we get in there, okay.
Well, this isn't even about necessarily lead, it's about adequacy. And so if we find a water line and a sewer line that's inadequate, we say to the owner, you've got to replace it. Or the owner comes to us and says, we need to replace it now because we're not gonna.
But that's a different, inadequacy
Right,
is a
it's
different
different.
case. And
Right, we're not-
Right, we're not,
Lead.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
based on.
We're not being
based on
forced to
our-
replace inadequacy.
Based on our documentation of the information we have a high level of confidence that the services on the private side are likely not lead at this point, just based
Right.
on replacing curb stops and inspecting and changing out meters. But the lead components will likely be at the main, which will drive the whole thing. So that's one of the questions as well we
Yeah.
have for DES, is if we can confirm that there's no lead on the private side, that it's copper, for instance, are we gonna be forced to still replace the entire segment at this point in
Yeah.
time? Or can we just replace the lead components that we come across?
Got it.
Well, I guess this,
Just keep
and we'll
adding
have
to
it,
the costs.
right, well, we'll have an update on this once we know more
Right.
at the next
Yeah.
meeting.
yeah, what I was looking for tonight is authorization to have the attorney help us draft what an agreement would look like
For a
for
replacement,
replacement
in
at the
both
expense.
cases, both the lead case and the...
Yeah, I mean, either way,
I mean, presumably, either one would require some type of contract with the homeowner,
yeah.
whether it's the lead or the inadequacy.
Right.
Well, yeah, we're, at this point, I'm thinking more of the inadequacy
Right.
piece at the moment, and it may be that lead constitutes inadequacy, based
Right,
upon what
becomes part of
DES
it,
tells us. But at this point, I'm assuming that what we're looking to do is to develop a program that would essentially allow people to borrow the money necessary to
Yes.
replace water line or sewer line that's determined inadequate if they can't fund it themselves. And we'll come back with hopefully a simple process where they would submit an application, it would get approved, it would wind up being a note, there'd be a lien filed, the cost of all of that would be theirs, but it would be spread over
Right, either
over
60
the
or
period of
120
time. And
minutes.
so
right.
we're talking about 68 water and how many sewer?
About 45.
About
sewer.
45 sewer, so.
Yeah,
if
I'd
we-
say let's go right to the motion. Well, we've done this before, so I mean, I
Right.
know we did this on Fairgrounds Road.
Okay, yeah, it's prior to my understanding. So it would be, essentially, we're looking at what could be a pool of $250,000 to $300,000. We would charge what I would presume to be an interest equal to what we're paying, but not any more than that. And so the cost, essentially what I'm looking for is essentially authorization to have Christine develop what amounts to a simple program.
Do we have the old contract that we had for fairgrounds? Would that suffice? Instead of getting a new one drafted up?
I don't know how you did it with that.
Well, I mean, that was when,
That's what I'm asking.
that was new, that
Yeah.
was new service, so it was a slightly different case.
Well, it may be a matter of changing a couple of words, but
You
in
still-
other words, to save some
When
time.
was
money.
that?
You still want it to go through the attorney.
Oh, I'm not saying you should.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
it's,
I don't disagree with that, but maybe if we have something we can give to the attorney and say, can you edit this?
yeah.
We could reach out to other communities.
Yeah,
Right,
she's,
right.
she's
They
familiar
have
with
it.
it, but other communities,
Yeah.
this is slightly different than the typically what happens if a community is extending water or sewer, they provide them with the opportunity to essentially service that portion of the bonded indebtedness, so they extend the bonded indebtedness benefit. In this case, we're not in a
Right,
position to
it's
do
a-
that,
it's
so
a
we have to fund it.
specific
But yeah,
project.
we'll see if we can find.
Just trying to save some pennies.
Yep,
Yes.
Right.
Pennies amount to dollars.
yep, there you go.
Motion, please.
I make a motion that what are we doing?
Authorize
Authorize
Don
Don
to
to
authorize the
authorize
attorney to,
To
yeah.
work with the attorney to
Work with the
develop.
attorney to develop a
Loan
loan
program.
funding program.
Yeah.
Second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Onward to financial services contract with MRI. I assume everyone's had a chance to look at this. I know I did earlier today. It does seem straightforward.
I have some questions about it.
Go, fire away.
I asked Dawn to reach out to them and define what they meant by financial management or financial director questions.
Thought we worked
And they
that
came
out.
back with the second iteration of it. However, they took out the training part of it that was in the first part of the contract,
Well, I mean.
the
this-
other one.
Right, but this is the new one here. It's still, the first section is titled training.
Right, but it doesn't address the fact that we have some pre-training involved.
Well, I think it does. MRI agrees to provide training as outlined in the attached memo
At
at
no
no cost
cost.
to the district. That first sentence.
The memo was there.
Right,
Right, so that
Okay,
was,
yeah.
right. And we had worked out with them at the last meeting what the financial
Well, and that
management
solves
thing
my problem.
was.
right, and he did outline, I mean, it does make mention in here, one thing I had a question on, but I answered it was, the outstanding services. So as, it does reference the March 30th memo, which I went back and looked
Right.
at, and it does, the numbers do line up with it, so I thought it looked,
Yeah,
Okay.
it looked fine to me.
I thought it looked okay.
That was my only question.
All right.
Okay, I make a motion, we approve the financial services contract with MRI.
I'd second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
One caveat with this, I'd like to see training start. We're suddenly, why are we so far behind in training?
Or are we?
We are, the last training was March. When's the next one?
The last time we talked with Christian, I think there's some questions with Mike Campo from Plaza that need to be outlined before we can move forward with some of the,
Yeah, but I thought the next the next iteration of training didn't seem to have anything to do with the auditor, but maybe I'm wrong. You know, I would have to
It has
look back.
do with reporting, which is
Oh,
going
okay,
to involve the
okay.
auditor setting up, helping us to set
Okay.
up the proper codes. That's the last items.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, potentially the only thing that's not in here that I think somebody mentioned was that we had asked for,
hours.
right, if they're gonna send us a bill, which they should itemize, you know,
Itemize, right.
like, what was the training provided and
Yeah.
what day and what
Yeah,
hour.
well,
An itemized.
And Kim's got that,
Okay.
that sheet, but not their hours, but she does have a sheet of the different dates or different sections of training that still need to be done.
Okay, all right.
the other thing
Who
that I
said-
noticed on
I
this
Oh,
is,
that's the training page you found. It's the
what
last
about,
page.
what about,
That,
the
that's the
people
training
they
page.
want for the training?
I'm sorry?
I mean, do we have a choice of who goes to the training? That was a concern I had before. In other words, it tells us who's gonna show up at these trainings. Can we have anybody we want, if we
Well,
want to add somebody?
I think the reason that that's set up that way was because those are the people that are directly involved in that particular section, and so not to necessarily add me or,
I understand that part of it to a certain degree, but the two managers of our operation here should know as much as possible.
I agree.
I don't think Jason needs to be an accountant, but he might need to know how to do some things in the software
Well, I
that they
mean,
might be able to learn.
Yeah, there's
but
a-
Jason and Don are listed as part of the budget module, for
Right.
example. So it seems like,
Yeah.
and then Jason is included on the purchase order and reporting module.
If
Yeah,
you're,
and Bob
look, if
is
you're
there.
satisfied with it, fine. I personally think that we should be able to put anybody in the training we want to put in there. It stipulates who's gonna be there.
well, we can always say we'd like, yeah,
Well, I
right? Can't we?
thought that if I'm not mistaken,
I mean, I thought
this
we had
does
talked all
allow
about that.
for additional training for a fee. So if we
Yeah, but
want,
if he's gonna, if it's coming on the heels of that training that's already listed,
Right, that's something
what's the
different.
big deal if we say we want Jason in training number 2, even though he isn't listed as to be part of training number 2?
right,
It's just another body in the room,
Right.
it shouldn't cost
That's what
any
I'm
more
trying to
money.
say.
Right.
Right.
Let's get everybody as trained as we can that might have any need to have this knowledge without having to pay extra for it, that's all.
I'm certainly not in disagreement with that.
So that's the only
I
thing
mean,
I would say.
I do remember when we were talking with Christian last time, he was explaining his, you know, sort of logic behind
Mm.
doing what, the training the way he was thinking of doing it. So, that's all I can say.
Did we get as far as approving this? The
Yes, we
motion?
did.
You get
Okay,
a motion.
yes, all right,
And
thank
we
you.
voted too, right?
Yes, we did.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Who signs it?
I believe I did.
Chris, thank you.
Yep.
There's also the bill for past work, if you can approve that, it's attached. It goes back to January 1.
Right.
This one? Yeah, that
Right,
one.
yeah. Ah, yes. Okay.
Okey-dokey. Next.
Updated purchasing policy, administration items. Sorry. Anything,
Do you have anything for me? There's been an advancement on a legal issue that we'll discuss
Later.
in non-public.
in non-public, okay.
Okay, nothing else, right?
No, I have nothing else that I can think of.
Okay. All right, so that brings us to the updated purchasing policy, updated sick leave policy.
Okay, I'm fine with the purchasing policy, I'm not fine with the sick leave policy. I really think the sick leave policy needs to be just, you get this many days, do what you want with them.
Yeah.
We had talked about doing that. I thought we had voted to do that before
I think it
COVID.
got lost in COVID. We were having that
We
conversation.
discussed it a long time.
Yeah.
You know, this is such an old school way of doing things, to pigeonhole people into, you've gotta take X number of days vacation, you gotta take X number of days sick leave. You know, if they're all bumped into one set of days and we carry over X number of days, it makes payroll that much easier, it makes accounting days that much easier. I think this has gotta be changed. That's my 2 cents about the sick leave policy, but I'm fine with purchasing policy.
It may be a bigger discussion, and one of the reasons I asked you to do this now is that this policy changed a little bit January 1. We used to have fractions of days
Right.
being allotted, so in order to stick with what we are doing with payroll right now would be to approve this so that basically people get their 10 sick days January through October, and they're not lapsing like the previous policy.
Right,
would. But so we could approve this so that we satisfy the auditor
Okay,
for
And
payroll.
then send it back through.
And then I think we should have a bigger conversation about what those days lumped together would look like. Because there's a couple things such as if someone was to use disability, they have to use up all their sick time prior to. I don't know how that rule would come into play if they had to use up personal time, vacation time.
I can just tell you from, you know, my job, everything's lumped into one.
Yeah.
If you get disability and you have to use it, you use everything.
Yep,
Whatever you've got built up, that's
that's how it works.
how it works. Bereavement is the same thing. And then there's an addendum, like an extension for, you know, if it's a significant other or child or, you know, something, immediate family
Yeah.
rather than extended family.
Yep.
That-
Is this something that we want to just move forward with, or is it something we need more discussion?
I mean, well, if we have to satisfy the auditors and we want to make sure people are getting paid and getting credited for right now, then we should approve it. But I really think that this needs to be really thought about and figured out, and maybe talk to other districts, how are they doing it? Other companies, how are they doing it?
We can revisit it at a later date.
Little date, yeah.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it needs to change and become more modern.
So I would suggest you vote to approve it.
Yeah,
With,
I got it.
with the provision that you
We're gonna revisit
bounce it
this.
back and have it revisited by year end.
Maybe even
That
before
too soon.
year end,
Yeah, I
so
would
that we
say,
can get
yeah.
it on the books maybe for 2023.
Yes, I would
Okay.
agree with that, so like,
So does this conform with what Paychex wants?
Paychex doesn't care.
They don't care.
lump all time PTO into one category, which is actually really
That's-
nice. And then Heidi is really, really
Right,
good.
see, that's what
That's
I'm
why
talking
I
about.
said it. That's
But
why
see,
I
that's
said
what
it.
I'm talking
But she
about.
does have to keep a spreadsheet. for
Right,
sick
so,
time and-
so
Right.
this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
already,
Oh.
Paychex already is lumping it, and then now
Yeah.
Heidi has to go back in and unlump it.
That's true.
right,
It's stupid.
right.
We need to just not, so I will.
Simple is better.
Right, I will agree to this, but I'd like to see this changed by July 1st.
Okay.
I
That
didn't
is a-
mean to poke the fire.
Well, I kind of already knew the
Well, yeah.
fire because that's how it works for me.
Throw
Yep.
gasoline on the fire.
You just request under paid time off, that's your
That
paid
sounds
time
like a
off.
project for you. You'd be motivated.
All right.
Take one thing off your plate,
Yes, no, I agree. I think
right? Just a little.
So
All right, so
our
I make a
motions,
motion to accept the sick leave policy as presented temporarily.
Through July
Through
1st.
July 1st, and I would like to see us revisit this to look
Fair.
at paid time off, period.
and the purchasing policy
I make a
changes.
motion, we accept the purchasing policy changes as written.
Second, Mr. Sansucci?
yes, I would second. that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Paul? Approved?
Can
Yes.
I
Okay.
just interrupt and suggest that July 1st will be here next week?
Yeah.
August 1st?
And so
Before.
I would say year end
September
with, I would say approve this through
It-
the year end with a
Don, can I
with a
just say, this shouldn't be
recommendation.
that hard.
Yeah.
I mean, we already know how many vacation days people get. We already
Okay.
know how many sick days people get. Let's just make this simple, stupid. You know, just,
The
it
issue may
shouldn't be that hard.
Two policies for the auditors to double check the,
My concern is if this is only good through July 1, if we don't have something adopted, what's that mean in terms of the audit?
that's what I'm thinking too, is like you probably want to stick to one policy for 2022 and then change going into the new year for 2023.
Right, but I want a discussion and I want it figured out.
Right.
I'm not saying we have to, yeah, I'm
not.
not saying we have to implement it, but I want to make sure that we're moving forward in the right direction.
But you said July 1.
Right, you
I did.
limited it, that it was
Right.
only until July 1st.
All right, I would like to amend that motion.
Till
and
December
say
December 31st, okay.
There we go.
Aye.
I was on the same page you
Fix
were.
that. Fix that, Kim.
All right, I'll just make one.
All right, I'll make a motion we accept the purchase orders as approved by email.
I'd second that.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I skipped right over Jason.
Jason!
There's
So
a
that you don't-
message in
I'll
there.
try to be brief.
Actually, I just wanted to get all the motions out of the way and then we could talk.
So we just wrapped up the RBC repairs, and we did
Yay.
come in under budget.
Yay!
Good news, finally.
So we were able to get
There's
4
hope.
sets of bearings replaced for that price, rather than the original 3.
Nice.
So there are 3 sets of bearings remaining. I propose we put that on the list for next year's
Yep.
replacement
Yep.
and be proactive. We were lucky this time not to have any shaft repairs, so that saved us a ton
Ton of money. Yeah.
Originally, you thought it was gonna be in the 70s, wasn't it?
84,000.
84, okay,
Yeah.
that's nice.
Yeah, no, it
Yep,
sounds
nice.
like a
That's 30K savings.
maintenance
Yep.
item that we should just pursue because,
Nice. Good job.
Yep. And then we talked about the Holderness River crossing options, and we also received a letter in the mail today from New Hampshire Electric Co-op that we have dropped below 50 kilowatt demand at Pump Station 1 over here since the new replacement and upgrade. So we have,
Nice.
compared to, what was it before?
I don't have that number before, but the threshold is 50 kilowatts of demand will bring us down into the next
Next
rate
level.
level. So
Nice.
we'll be saving quite a significant
Amount of money.
there.
That's awesome. And that's because of the variable drives and
The higher efficiency
efficiency
pumps.
pumps.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
we are wrapping up the punch list items with Kingsbury. We have 1 item remaining on the punch list that is a physical item that would need to be redone. And that is a disconnect at Foster Street. The electrical contractor will be there on Friday to fix that. Other than that, the O&M manuals for all the equipment are being reviewed at Wright Pierce. I believe they're ready to send them back for final approval, and we are pretty much coming to the end of the list with all of the items that we're both in agreement with.
And then the redesign of the,
Don't forget the backing of,
Back in the baskets.
Right, so the baskets were an issue that was brought up.
oh, yes, right.
We decided probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, due to safety concerns, that we will cease operation of that temporarily in order to allow Wright Pierce to come up with a solution to make those operate in a safe manner. So we are still working through that at this point. And in lieu of the rags continue to pile up in there, in lieu of sending them through the pumps and down the line, we will be having a Vector truck coming within the next few weeks. We may expedite that as an option to just remove those rags.
we're gonna keep track of
Yeah.
the costs separately, so that it can be pursued if it's appropriate.
Needed.
And they have also provided a truck scale correction as well on the approach of the truck scale for us that we reviewed and sent back comments on.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Anything
Thank you.
else?
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
That should be it for me tonight.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Good news.
Anything else?
Well, that brings us to,
Do I make a motion? You want me to make a motion?
yes, please. Well, we're gonna,
So I make a motion, we enter into non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, section 2A for personnel,
Second that motion?
all those in favor?
6:20.
Yeah.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.